Hi, I'm Andrea.
Hey, y'all, this is Courtney, and welcome to the Human Design and Liberation podcast.
This is a space where we explore how human design and liberation theology intersect with the past, present, and future,
with the intent of sharing the beauty and pain of the human experience to encourage you in your liberation journey.
Hello.
Hey, girl.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
You see my Mother's Day present. One of them.
So sweet.
My baby girl made a little bracelet for me. Yeah, Mother's Day was
cute.
good.
Yeah.
How was yours?
It was good. Arthur made me a fairy house.
Precious.
It's so cute.
I need
So
pictures
cute.
of that.
I'll send you pictures. It's adorable. Yes, amongst other things that they both made at school. So it's very cute.
Yes.
Very, very cute.
I love the school gifts. Always adorable.
So I'm excited about today.
Me too. Yeah, like lead us in, because this came from your brain, even though, like as soon as you said it, it's like bing, 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 all over my head.
Yeah, I think it was a splenic hit. So what we're talking about today, I'm naming it spiritual fears with air quotes. That's like the best way I can think to describe.
It's a good name.
So it's really been up for me mainly because I've seen a couple of practitioners pretty violently attacked recently online.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Mainly I'm thinking of woman that I follow who's an herbalist. Olivia is her name. And her brand is Organic Olivia. And she is an herbalist. And so very much related to the things that we're talking about. We'll get into like how herbalism is interrelated. But essentially, she had a podcast episode with a woman who works in healing, some divination. She has been trained in a West African modality, which I don't necessarily feel qualified to comment on, although I will say it was a little bit of a red flag for me because she's white. But I did see some Black identifying people in the comments saying like, okay, at first this was a red flag for me, but I can see where this is being done with authenticity and with, honoring the tradition, and truly like this woman was trained and it is like she feels called. And so it's not performative in any way, that sort of thing.
Right.
So yeah, I felt better having read those comments because those were the exact thoughts that I was having through my mind. Which is part of why I was even in the comments. But I was like shocked to see all of the like, you're going to hell comments. Like,
oh yeah.
Ooh, Lord have mercy. And I think that there was certainly something deep within me that was triggered at seeing those comments.
Yeah.
And I know that this is something that you and I have talked about in the past, like in our conversations. I don't think we talked about it on the pod before, but these spiritual fears.
Yeah.
These very real,
absolutely.
very real spiritual fears. So yeah, that's why I was like, I had been wanting to make a YouTube video for it like years ago. Obviously that was not the place to do it. I mean, this will be a YouTube video too, so it's fine. But
there you go, 2 for 1.
Yeah, this is perfect. This is why it was meant to happen here, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts and how it's shown up for you.
Yes, I see. This is so funny because before we started recording, I'm like, okay, I understand, but I'm like, I just know I got to be in it. Like,
yeah,
you got to be recording. Like, we got to have the lights on. Like, it's got to be in it, and then I'll feel it and know what's going on. And as soon as you said what you said, it reminded me of something that happened years ago. And it was a extended family member making some commentary around like voodoo. And it was a
such a good
white
example.
family member making commentary about like, basically like saying the word voodoo is like a connotation that is evil, that it's bad, it's satanic, there's something wrong with it. Just the word itself has been morphed into this boogeyman, like scary thing. And I know how deeply these individuals love A Chronicles of Narnia. They love A Lord of the Rings. They love, and we're dealing with fictional, but rooted in some like real kind of cultural traditions, witchcraft, and how acceptable that is to as a tool for learning, as a tool for like understanding. And then also, coming from like an evangelical kind of charismatic Christian background, speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, signs, wonders, and miracles, even sacraments and that kind of thing can get into all very mystical, mysterious things,
Totally.
But I instantly saw like the white magic, black magic moment, right? Where like, oh, this is good and fun and cute and culturally like acceptable, but magic whose origins are from Black and brown peoples were automatically labeled as dangerous, unacceptable, demonic, destructive, malicious. And that was kind of before I even was going too deeply into my own relationship with all of that, like my spirit. But in that social moment, I was like, this isn't right. This is what, white supremacist delusion looks like, like this is a perfect example of white supremacist delusion. When you can believe deeply in magic, you can work with magic, quote unquote, work with spiritual things that you don't fully understand, but you fully embrace because of the true impact it's had on your body and your life. But someone else's version of that, especially when it's not of European origin, is instantaneously labeled
voodoo,
wrong and scary. Voodoo, which is
negative.
We'll get into all of that. Is
will.
Automatically a negative thing, and so that's really, really such a. I really appreciate this conversation, like us having it, because a lot of us are, a lot. It's still a big conversation. It's a big struggle. I don't know if I want to launch into another story right yet, but I do have one for later.
I'm excited for them
More
because,
stories.
What I think I want to like lead in with is that this is a shared experience. And as we get into the roots of where this comes from, I think that our listeners will start to put things together that they've never put together before. I'm chilling on that. And this is part of my life's work. I've literally been on this trip. I'm really chilling on that. Like, I don't know if you can see
I can. Oh my God, I can. Yeah.
The goosebumps. So for me personally, that I have like a family background of the consequences of this harm. And I'm not going to get into too much of that. But as a result, I was reading things like Conversations with God when I was in high school.
Oh.
I was reading the Celestine prophecy. I was reading these esoteric books because of this family stuff. So I was doing that at the same time that I was attending a Christian youth group. Neither of my parents are practicing Christians, so that created its own tension.
Right.
You know, very first phase, sixth line type of things.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's really kind of been a fuel for me throughout my whole lived experience. And the more I have allowed myself to dive into the origins, the closer I have felt to God, the closer I have felt to the divine. And the more sense I've been able to make out of how we've gotten where we are now, which is allowing me to kind of see a way out. And I think that's kind of the disclaimer I want to give, is that wherever you are in the process, learning a little bit more is going to help you be able to see your way out.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Period. So many feelings. I'm just having a lot of feelings right now. I think that's what it is. It's like I'm having a lot
feeling?
I'm feeling vulnerable because I'm feeling so seen. You know, like I feel so connected to you in a lot of ways. And this in particular, like feeling the desire to seek about deeper truths based on, you don't even really know what is fully based on at first. It's just like this hunger, like a very primal need for a broader, stronger truth container than the one that buddy have.
The video just gave her.
The video was doing funny things.
That's not going to make sense.
Not make any sense at all. But a bigger, stronger truth container than what I was given. You know,
I mean, that sounds very sixth line to me, you know. Right?
It's like, this ain't it. This is not cutting it. I am dangling outside of it. That's what it felt like. You know, totally. I'm dangling outside of this theology.
You were. You know? Literally were.
I absolutely was. And I felt it. And it was just like, but what I love about the sixth line that we both share is that the sixth line kept me for some reason, it kept me from feeling like I was the problem. You know, or maybe that's where I am now, because I think in this first 30 years, I did feel very much like the problem, that the container wasn't the problem. I was the problem. And I think now on the roof, I can say very confidently that the container was the problem.
Yeah.
That I was never a problem. I was never a problem in the eyes of my creator at all. Like,
no you were never anything but a gift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's, I love that. So that's what I know now. So that's what I'm feeling. I'm like going back to that, like the first phase of, I'm feeling that like dangling, that very, very insecure feeling spiritually, and unsatisfied too. Just like,
yeah. So I think it'd be interesting to dive into where, you know, at least in recent history, where we can see the separation starting from religion and spirituality, so to say, or like religion and earth-based practices. Like I would include astrology in an earth-based practice. And it's really incredible and a testament, I think, to the modalities, how they have withstood the violence and trauma that is a part of the story.
Yes, 100%.
So for anyone listening who is noticing some discomfort or like anxiety come up around this topic, I just want to witness you, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that is a very normal response. And just to trust your curiosity and your strategy and authority. Take what resonates, leave the rest. Just know that you are in your own process, and try not to compare how you are feeling now to how I'm feeling now or how Courtney's feeling now, right?
Yes.
I mentioned this is a life's work for me. So I think this process started for me around 8 or 9 years old. And so I'm 45 now. So, I've got 35-ish years of work on this stuff that I've been doing.
Right.
That's led me to this point. And so, and also I do think that knowing our history, knowing our ancestry is power. And it really it gives so much space for compassion and for healing and for witnessing. And that is really what has allowed supremacy delusion to continue, is the lack of witnessing, the lack of compassion. And so if we can bring that back in, only that, then I think we're going to see massive shifts.
Oh, yeah, for sure. 100%. 100%. So we're jumping into how do we get here? How did we get here, Andrea? How did we get to this feeling of a fork in the road when it comes to wanting to embrace a more I don't want to say traditional because it's not, but a more
Daryl.
Yes, a very kind of strictly I'll just say a non-natural.
Yes, it is non-natural. It's a very mental process, right? Yeah.
Yeah, a process of faith and religion, which is a whole thing. This whole knowledge is, the monks and everything were very much the pursuit of knowledge is a spiritual pursuit.
Absolutely.
So that idea and the animist, earth-centric forms of worship and spiritual practice, how did that become an either or?
Yeah. So what we know is that up until, let's say, about 400 AD, they were not either or anywhere. And in many places after 400 AD, they were still not either or. But what happened around, obviously we're talking about the story of the losers.
Yeah.
So it's very challenging to find accurate representation of how they lost.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
We know how the winners won, but we don't know how the losers lost. So who are the losers? The losers are the Celts and the Nords and the Vikings, all of these animist and earth-based spiritual practices. They were religions that existed prior to Romanized Catholicism or Romanized Christianity. And what I mean by Romanized Christianity is because between when Jesus lived and Rome adopted Christianity, there was an ethos and a culture within Christianity that was very specific. that changed after Rome adopted it. And we know this based on, a lot of the writings that are left. Like, for example, the fact that we celebrate Sunday is a Roman adaptation to Western culture. That was their day of celebrating the sun, like the literal sun. The reason why Jesus is called the Son of God was a Roman adaptation to Jesus being the light, Jesus being the sun. Like, there's a lot of overlapping here and that was the way that they were able to convert the Romans to Christianity. Like, they were the original conversion, right?
They're kind of smoothing that path, like smoothing that transition by basically adapting what, like, the religious infrastructure that was already there, and kind of like retooling it, almost like retooling the machine for like a different type of output.
Right. Which the Romans then did as they carried that banner around the world, right? So when you go to Mexico, the holidays that are celebrated are very different in the Catholic Church to what's celebrated in Ireland, for example, right? So that was something that happened all over, but that was not something that Jesus taught. Like, that wasn't that wasn't his message, right? And so right there, you see a break. And early Christians knew that it was a break, but it was also a play for survival because they were being persecuted in so many areas. And there's evidence of internal discord over that amongst those who were followers of Jesus, who didn't even really call themselves Christians until close to when the Romans adopted Christianity. They really just saw themselves as Jews who were following a specific teacher. So
which
that's
is
interesting.
A thing that still kind of resonates in Judaism, that there are different Judaistic, Jewish doctrines as well, because different teachers had their own. So like, that's not a departure. It's not abnormal.
Yeah. So basically, very quickly, because, Rome was so focused on hoarding power. I mean, that was, the Roman Empire started in like 800 BC, 750 BC, around then, right? So by the time Christianity enters, like, Rome is actually past its prime. Like, Christianity was kind of like a ploy to kind of revive its empire in a way. Like way past its prime. In fact, shortly after Constantine, like, it essentially, the Roman Empire dissolved. So what's interesting is that the Catholic Empire starts to thrive as the Roman Empire is dissolving. And so you can see where there was just this kind of pivot, I guess.
Yeah.
And the, political vying and all of the power that church leaders were able to abscond over the years just really fueled that. So I'm just painting like a backdrop of this organized religion that we know was a big influence.
Yeah.
So what started happening is you had this confluence of factors. You had these indigenous spiritual practices that really emphasized responsibility to the people. The gods had to be appeased, okay? So when you look at Celtic practices, when you look at Nordic practices, like, there were these rituals and there were these practices, beliefs, and some of them, like, carry with us today. How we ended up getting Santa Claus is a really great example of that. It actually comes from the Sami people. of the Nordic countries. And on the winter solstice, the priest or priestess, shaman, would go to people's homes to practice plant medicine with this specific mushroom that is red and white. The mushroom is red and white. They would dress in red and white. And because it was the dead of winter, there was snow everywhere. They had to come through the chimney to get into these people's homes.
Oh my goodness.
No lie. Like the things that we do are taken from these indigenous practices. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, you cannot make this stuff up. So you have these essentially in the beginning, they are these Roman emissaries going to these different countries preaching how great this religion is. And you have these rulers who are accountable to spiritual leaders that are essentially preventing them from exploiting, keeping them responsible to their people, right? And this was not a land of plenty. Like this was a land of very scarce resources. Western Europe, deep winters, a lot of toil just to have food, just to be able to survive. It was not like an easy life. And so here you have these, emissaries coming and saying like, all of this is evil. The reason your people are suffering is because you believe in false idols. You have to repent and then your people will not suffer anymore, right? And not only that, if you repent, then you get to make the decisions. Like all you have to do is accept Jesus and you're absolved of all of your sins. And it just gave people this free pass and removed the accountability that was in place with these indigenous structures, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then you layer in the patriarchal approach that Rome already had for 1,000 years by that point. Like patriarchy and enslavement and all of these practices that we know are harmful and have harmed our ancestors were well underway in that realm, right? And so you just see this massive proliferation of that. So part of that, and this is where like the fear comes in, is that as these emissaries were able to get these rulers to convert, right? And it was in their best favor because then all of a sudden, they had support from this, religious group and they were able to, collect tithes, and that was part of like what paid the kingdom. Like there was a lot of money involved here, a lot of money. And the people resisted. Like the people were not interested. They wanted to keep they called it the old way. That was really how, like when you look through history, they wanted to keep the old way. And so the priests started resorting to Roman tactics of just attack, right? Of like rounding up practitioners and torturing them, accusing them of heresy, executing them in front of their families. Anytime there was an accusation of heresy, they would take these practitioners and torture them, march them through town, force everybody, I want to say like deacons, like all of the church people would get people out of their homes, and it was mixed in with the king's forces, right? So like the king's forces were at the charge of the priest. And so
talk about just cycles and patterns.
So many cycles and patterns. And they would force everyone out of their homes to watch these executions. So then it kind of became a game because you had the people who knew how to play the game well, and then they would be able to abscond power by telling on other people, right? And
of course,
it just really pit people in the communities against each other. It pit families against each other. It destroyed so much in Western Europe. And so you had these like enclaves where they didn't penetrate easily. Like I would say the Nordic countries were particularly hard. Those were converted much later. Within France, you had southern France, right? Gaul, which, didn't convert until the Inquisition, which was, much later. I think the Inquisition started like in 1300s, 1400s. So this was a period, these were tactics that were employed by the Roman Catholic Church over, 1,500 years, basically.
Wow.
And what were the practices that those people were doing? They were, depending on the region they were in, it was divination, it was herbalism, it was cosmologies. I mean, we know of astrology was a big part of it. But in each region, there were different cosmologies. So it really varied. And so that wisdom was systemically attacked.
Yeah. Oh.
So it makes sense to me when somebody freaks out, is like, oh my God, this is from the devil. Because I'm like, that's what your ancestors were sold for 25 generations, at least on the Western European side, which we're going to get into non-Western European side as well. So that's like one aspect. And then you have the patriarchy aspect, which compounds the issue.
Exactly. Yeah, it does. And I'm just like, what I'm feeling is, like you said, it's from the devil. This is dangerous. We're vocalizing like a deep, deep kind of splenic conditioning in those moments. Like the amount of destruction, like, I don't know. It's really hard to help people understand. The level of destruction.
They think that 9 to 11 million women were killed for heresy in the Middle Ages. And I didn't learn about the mass persecution until reading Lila June's blog, which we can share in the show notes. But essentially, Lila June is this beautiful Native activist. This was shared to me during a program I know I've talked about before, A Lifetime in Quarantine, that I took in April, like before George Floyd of 2020, which was all about nervous system healing for Black and brown bodied people, and white bodied people were invited to witness. And so what ended up happening is we needed to have separate spaces, obviously, because of, the lack of awareness. And within the white identifying space, Lila June's article was shared. And it was shared by this beautiful human that I am still in touch with today. Her name is Jen. And I will, I'll tag her in the show notes as well. Jen Wilsey is her last name.
Wow.
Yes. So what Lila June, so she is a Dene member, which is a tribe out of Alaska. And during one of the indigenous ceremonies, she is half Dene, half white. And during one of those ceremonies, her white ancestors called her home.
Wow. Oh.
And she went to Europe to discover what their spiritual practices had been, and really uncovered all of this trauma that had been buried, and wrote this phenomenal blog about it that is just mind-blowing. So when I read that in 2020, I was like, holy shit, this all makes sense. Like it is all making sense.
Yeah.
And I think the piece that we have to remember is that it was mostly people with uteruses who had these gifts. It was mostly people who had less strength to be doing the physical work in the field, right? They were doing more of the internal homework, and they were closer to those mystical encounters because of that.
Yeah. And also so, the birth work, like as we're learning, I think we shared some the anthropological stuff, and the bodies, yes, were different, but the respect was not like because they were weaker. It's because their strength was being used for reproduction. Yes. And that was treated like, you need people in order to need food, right?
Yes.
That's something that we actually thought before all of this.
Yeah.
And realized
that was something that was very revered in indigenous practices, for sure. And it really got flipped on us in this process, right? It really got flipped on us. So, when society is in a healthy relationship, there is an honoring of birthing and of women's bodies and men's bodies and the unique strengths that are brought to the table, and not in a binary sense, because it's across the table, right? It's not like a cis thing. It is just like following your strategy and authority. How is your body meant to be used? But when someone with a uterus decides to have a child, they basically take themselves out of the workforce for a while.
Yes.
And they also create life. So those two things are mystical experiences in and of themselves, right?
Yes.
And so when you think about, and I can't remember if we talked about this last week, but I know you and I talked about this last week, of this deep dive I've been doing on patriarchy, which is like taking me down some major rabbit holes. But when you think about the rules that started to be placed on women, and this goes back 5,000-6,000 years. This is not, this was nothing new by the time the Romans picked up that mantle, but they really perfected it, and, would not allow women to vote, didn't allow women to hold political office. There were so many layers of patriarchy. But then you layer in this fact that so many women have these skills, right? Like these life-saving skills, because herbalism was medicine that saved lives. And that became very threatening. The men doubted whether or not they were actually going to be saved by these women, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense, because they had been harming them. And so they were afraid that the women were going to harm them back, right? And honestly, like, I think that's a valid fear. But instead of stopping harming them, they just double down.
The splenic center operating correctly, by the way. That was definitely like, you should probably think about how you treat that person, because they could save your life if you needed it. And that's why, that explains it. The ajna was not an alignment with their...
No, the ajna was like, oh, we got to double down on this, and we got to kill them all. Now, here's the crazy part. So we're still in Western Europe. They've killed, 9 to 11 million women. And then what happens? They go into the Dark Ages. Plagues, famine, like how many deaths happened? And that, over several hundred years, is what predates the transatlantic slave trade.
Wow.
So why did they need to steal people? Why did they need to steal resources?
They were gone. They were wiped out.
They messed themselves up. Yep.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And heartbreaking.
And heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. It is, because, it's, I guess I come to this like 6-line place of recognizing, unfortunately, as humans, we have to experience the absolute worst in order to remember the best of us.
Yeah.
And so if I can look at this 2,000 year period or 1,700 year period, and, things were pretty bad when Jesus came around. Like, I think if they hadn't been bad, he wouldn't have come then.
Listen,
Like things were not going so great. So let's say 2,500 year period. What I also think is so interesting, and you and I talked about this a tiny bit last week, but I've been thinking about it since, is how these sicknesses traveled, right? Like this, these ways of being, the violence, the harm, traveled to this land that we are on. And when you look at the history of this land, it is nothing like that history, right?
No.
Now, it wasn't rainbows and butterflies. Like, I mean, there was definitely, tribal feuds and, territorial stuff. But ultimately, this knowingness of the land, a relationship with the land, the cosmologies that we're talking about, the spiritual practices that kept people in healthy relationship were mostly intact until the 1500s. And so it makes sense to me that we could remember that more easily here.
It's so
like the land holds that memory,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like, well, I also feel like that story is still unfolding too, because the losers in history, in what is now the United States, is the indigenous community. And I feel like there's stories that we don't even know when it comes to what they've gone through. And I mean, also
and
feel
the
like
survivors of the slave trade, right? Like
also
also
that both. Yeah, for sure. Like, well, I was thinking just before the slave trade, the indigenous, their encounters with, like Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
And, the first Europeans that landed, on the coast of what is now the United States. But, and then the encounters that happened in the motherland.
So what was interesting is that there were many encounters with Europeans before the settlers. So that's something that we don't know a lot about, but there's several stories of Native Americans being enslaved and taken back to Europe.
Right.
Like hundreds of years before.
That's Pocahontas' story. She was trafficked.
Oh, was she?
Yeah, because she was very, very young. She was too young to be married to a John Smith. And by the time she was essentially taken, they took her back to England, and she died very soon after.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Of illness, yeah. So it really, there's so many layers. And I think one thing that I think is interesting, and I think it ties in really well to this conversation. I have the channel of curiosity and the channel of surrender. So I'm looking at my experiences and what I know, and understanding the power of storytelling. One thing about the establishment of the United States is a shift in the storytelling about who a winner is and who a loser is. The fact that our nation is a settler colony, in comparison to a Europe, which is
or like a Roman Empire,
right? And so what you have is you have individuals who are not kings and queens and dukes and duchesses. These are commoners in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Establishing themselves as the winners and the storytellers in the United States. And so what you begin to see is almost like this splintering of the big uppity ups aren't cool, and the ones below us aren't either. But this rugged individualism kind of propped up out of this idea of I pull myself up by my bootstraps, me and my Lord, me and my God. And it's the sheer power of God and the will of these rugged people that's been able to subdue the savages take the Black man, save the Black man, which I think is another really important piece of this, and save them from what, their lives of aimless, debauchery or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, all you're doing is passing on this legacy of violence and killing and harming.
The actual story itself is the same, but the method of storytelling changes dramatically because of the radical spirituality and the economic standing of these individuals.
That
and
part.
So it's really, but we'll see it. The misogyny is still there. The racism still there. The incredible amounts of violence still there. I mean, they're putting each other in stocks.
I mean, even the practices of the police today are a great example of the same practices that were used in medieval Europe.
Oh, yeah.
So
Salem witch trials.
Yes.
The same. And which started with a Black woman. The very first woman who was killed in the Salem witch trials was a Black woman. And so...
And I think they were accusing her of voodoo.
Yeah.
They were accusing her of creating a doll to torture someone.
Yeah, but she was the first. And so it was a shot. It was a warning shot to the women and to the Black people and the indigenous community. It was a shot for everyone.
Yeah.
Who was not a white man. Yeah. And so it really is important, to me, and is resonating with me deeply as someone who's like a product of the South. I'm a product of the United States. I'm a product of these stories, this education system and these celebrations and religion. Yeah. That the storytelling changed, but the stories didn't.
Yeah.
And the fear had all this room to continue to flourish. The fear was still very much a very central ingredient to keeping the population subdued here.
Yes.
Just like it was there.
Yeah. And I think what you're connecting in, which is where I really wanted to go next, is how this impacted people who do not have Western European descent or don't have, majority Western European descent. Because when you look at those with Western European descent, that trauma and that violence is further down the chain. Yeah. And so we have become propagators of that trauma and violence, but we have forgotten the trauma and violence that was done to us. And what happened is that became like a moral failure. So when we are attacked by the same system, because we're all being attacked by the same system, it's viewed as a moral failure. When you look at the way that the people who came over through the transatlantic slave trade were treated, right? That is a much more recent memory. That is, 400 or 500 years ago. That is, less than 100 years ago, right? The same tools and tactics have been used repeatedly in lynchings and in so many other ways of killing, for lack of a more creative term. And so when we look at those fears that came up for you, right, they are possibly more palpable and just more paralyzing than, let's say, like the way they're going to show up for me is going to be a little bit more subtle, and it's going to make me think that it's like a moral failure on my part. Whereas for you, it's going to make you feel like you're in mortal danger. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm putting the people around me in danger. Another thing, what you said really makes me think about how legacy-minded Black and brown people tend to be. Like everything we do is going to impact the people around us all the time. Doesn't matter like what it is. But in this specifically, absolutely, it's, like I remember buying my first tarot deck a few years ago and how massive of a deal that was. Huge, huge deal to have a tarot deck and I specifically chose a hoodoo tarot deck, and it was totally one of those sacral yeses where I saw it. I was in a Black-owned bookstore in DC with Rebecca Baruchi and some incredible women that just all of them so wonderful. And I was like in this space of a lot of joy and pleasure and just feeling very free. And that's where I could really like hear, like as soon as I saw it, I was like, I need this. Like, I know that I need this. And, but at the same time, like I bring it home and I'm like, oh my God, like what did I just bring into my house? And so there's, again, you know, I think what's beautiful about fear, which I think is a larger conversation I think that we're getting at here, which is like fear is not necessarily in and of itself a bad thing.
Right.
And one of the beautiful things about the fear that I experienced was it gave me the opportunity to learn. It gave me the opportunity to dig. And what I came to understand is that line in the sand, that crossroads that Europeans were forced into by the Romans is something that has not ever fully caught on in the Black community.
Right.
With all the push and intensity that it was people tried to force this out of us. And I'm not saying to a certain extent it didn't happen, but the gospel music, the ring shout, the Holy Ghost kind of encounters. Oh God, what is happening?
Zoom is celebrating you.
You gotta
go to the YouTube and see this video. Wow.
That was crazy.
That was cool. All right.
I can't believe we have this recorded.
We're listening.
But it never went away. And so when I read about hoodoo and read that hoodoo, because, you know, very short explanation, voodoo is a layering because it came out of like the New Orleans kind of area.
It came out of West African
through
cosmology
that channel.
tradition.
Through that New Orleans channel. And so it's French inspired with the Catholicism mixed with like Haitian modalities and religion via Africa, right? So it's more of it's like a Catholic flavored, you know, like Santeria or something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
So hoodoo came through almost, from what I understand, through like the Gullah Geechee community. So it's a slightly different.
It is,
and it's also more influenced by Anglican Protestantism because that was the area where Protestantism was more
present,
prolific and present.
Yep.
And so they are these slightly different. And so for me, it was one of those moments where I'm like, that's me.
Yeah.
You know? And the other thing that really hit for me, and I think I remember having this conversation with you, but I said, however I feel about, or more so whatever I think about or was taught about hoodoo or voodoo or traditional African religions or any of this, whatever I think about it, I'm here because of this. There's what my family, what my lineage has gone through in the 500 plus years to get me here. Like, all of it is what got me here. All of it is the reason why I'm here. Like Frost says, the conditioning, however you feel about it, got you here.
Got you here.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so there is a level of like, put some respect on my name that I felt when I encountered my tarot deck, which was like, this, it doesn't matter if you think this is good or bad, right or wrong. Those binaries have nothing to do with the existence and the power and the potency of what these religions and spiritual practices are, because the power of it
is why you're
the
here.
reason why you're here.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
You know?
Huge.
So, and
Yeah.
I have chills from that. And so it's like,
I do too.
that put me in a different place when it came to, that answered my fear. It answered it. Like, it honored it, but it answered it. It's like, Courtney, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, my heart was like, I understand why you're starting to question your worthiness around this, because your worthiness has been so deeply attached to being a perfect Christian. Your worthiness, your safety, all of that. But now you know for a fact that it was all of this, including these things that these groups around you are misinformed and deluded and don't know what they're saying. Now you know, like, now I knew that this was already a part of me.
Yeah.
And so my next step is to reconcile the relationship that I have with this, because it is a part of who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, like, this encapsulate part of what I wanted to make sure our listeners are taking away, I guess, is a way to think of it, is that, like, it's perfectly normal to have fear around these modalities. Like, it is a healthy response to the trauma that our lineage has experienced. But and also they are a part of the human experience. And so just othering them is only going to divorce you from a part of yourself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It robs you of the experience of the box being big enough for you.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Yeah. That's what we started out with. Like, be both experiencing, like, this box of the spirit box is not containing my spirit. Like, my spirit is not in here. It's like a couple of legs. I'm imagining one of our kiddos, you know how kiddos like to shove themselves in boxes, you know, or whatever, and then, like, drag their bodies across the floor with their arms. That's what I felt like. So we were doing weird shit. Like, what in the world? Like, wearing small clothes. And it wasn't made for us. Like, it was not made for us. Like, and to, you know, yes, you have the fear, but just know that, like, part of that fear is coming from a place where that fear is because you've been walking around in something that wasn't made for you for a long time. And the fear of what it means to be free, what it means to feel comfortable inside of something. You were just taught that you're supposed to be uncomfortable in it, that's how it was supposed to be. You're just supposed to fear that, you know?
Yeah. And also, like, if you're in clothes that are the right size, you'll be killed.
Yeah.
You know? Like, okay, well, I'll just be uncomfortable in it. You know, ill-fitting box because I don't want to die, you know? At least, you know, especially for your recent ancestors and for my more distant ancestors, I think that is 100%. Definitely, and maybe not that distant. I mean, I know that I had very, you know, powerful and, like, they like to push the box. My especially my female ancestors.
Oh wow.
Yes, big time. So, you know, that wasn't something that was safe to do for you know, regardless of your lineage, it wasn't safe.
Right.
So I want to make sure we bring this around so that our listeners can think about, okay, what do I do with this fear when it comes up? Because it's going to come up. If you don't have it, people around you will have it. Like, it's endemic.
Common. Yeah, it is. I know that for me, one of the biggest things was learning, the information in and of itself is not dangerous. And I know that that's such a, I grew up in religious systems that said that, like, knowing about something is basically the same as endorsing it.
Wow. And think about that in and of itself, right?
Listen.
Because if you don't know about it, then how can you heal it? And so if I just keep you ignorant,
keep you in the dark entirely,
then you can never heal these histories of trauma that your ancestors faced.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. But it's totally your right to know. It's your right to know. And that's the beautiful thing about outer authority, if you think about it, because you can choose. Like, we have choice about what the outer authority is. And so
and your inner authority will tell you. Your inner authority is going to tell you
that part.
Yeah. I mean, I think the moral of the story is, like, you got to follow your strategy and authority. And if you are, falling into a not self behavior around it, you're going to feel frustration. You're going to feel bitterness. You're going to feel anger. Yeah. You're going to feel not self. And so, trusting your strategy and authority, one of the things that will happen is that if you're not trusting your strategy and authority, then you will continue to bump up against it. And so, one of the things that I have had to navigate is, different, like, anxieties, or like not believing myself when I'm getting a clear message, right? I have splenic authority. And so I would second guess myself or talk myself out of things because of those kind of fear patterns. And so your strategy and authority is just going to keep bumping you up against it until you're able to heal at a level where you can start to trust. Yes,
absolutely. I know I experienced the same thing with my sacral authority. And I know you have resource yourself, which is like my favorite. That's like my favorite thing. I've never heard someone say resource yourself before until I met you. And now it just rings in my head all the time because it's true. It's like life is all these different things. Like right now we're talking about life as this opportunity to engage the fear of spirituality, and resourcing yourself when you are engaging this space is critical, just like any other space, So like, for instance, the generator, joy is a big thing. Like, something that I found deep joy in is gospel music. I love it so much. It moves me so deeply. It gives me chills. I love to sing to it, and it keeps me joyful, feeling connected, feeling inspired, feeling seen. That music for me just does something that, like, only my sacral knows what's happening. Like, my sacral and my spirit. I don't know. I can't explain to you why this happens, but it happens every time, and I'm just here for it. I'm just accepting it, and I'm just soaking it in. So it's transmuting something. I love that. Yeah. And I think resourcing yourself, this is where it's so helpful to know your design and know what you need, right? Like, for those that are non-emotionals, right? You might just need some alone time to digest emotional energy that is in your environment, whether it's, with your partner or your family members. If you're a second line, you need alone time. Yes.
If you have a defined crown like I do and you're a projector, you might just need to go down some real good rabbit holes, which, I have to just give myself a lot of space for lots of rabbit holes because that fills me up. That leaves me feeling energized.
Yeah. Yeah. And how you're feeling in it, like you keep saying, but I just want to reiterate how you're feeling in the process. Like, the fear is the first thing you might feel, but it's not, the fear is not there. So you start ignoring everything else, or you're just trying to run away from the sensation, and you're trying to go from sensation to no sensation. Like, that's not the goal.
That's not the goal. Yeah. Yeah.
The goal is to bring your sensation to your signature, by following your strategy and authority.
Yeah. There's an interesting quote from Maston Kipp, who he used to write The Daily Love. This was, more than 15 years ago, probably. No, more than 10 years ago, probably 12 or 13 years ago. But one of the things that he would say is, fear is a compass pointing you in the direction you need to go, unless you're in mortal danger. Which I always thought was great. It's like, if fear's bringing something up, it's because you're meant to move towards it, because there's something there to be uncovered. But always, using your strategy and authority, always trusting your own inner guidance, and knowing that if you don't feel the capacity, the whole reason why we resource ourselves is so we have the capacity for these complex feelings and experiences. But if you don't have the capacity, it's just going to come back. So it's okay. Yep. Just like, be honest. I don't have the capacity for this right now. Like, I probably should dive into this, but I just can't. And have grace for yourself, and know that, like, if it's meant for you, it's going to come back around, and hopefully you'll have more capacity for it when it does.
I love that, because life be lifing, and we can't deal with it all at one time, But I will say also that, as we keep reiterating strategy and authority, if your current faith container does not hold space for you to, like, have an understanding and a trust in your strategy and authority, a sense of, like, you can't know what you need, because that's a big part of the tradition that I came from, that it could be your very first step.
It could be. And it could be the biggest revolution.
It really could. It is. I believe it is. Everything that comes after that, is wonderful, but there's nothing that will ever supersede you, like, arriving to the place where you know that your body knows what you need through your strategy and authority.
Mic drop. Like,
yeah.
So good. Yeah. Thank you, love. This was so good.
This was so good. I needed this. I did. I felt very along for the ride for this one. I was like, I don't know how much I got to bring to this one, because I kind of need it myself.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in.
Yes.
Please do follow the show and leave us your reviews. Connect with us. Find us on Instagram.
Yes.
We'll be better about adding our profiles and stuff, because I'm not even sure they're on there.
They are. No, they are.
They are? Okay, good. Okay.
I'm going to double check.
Come say hi, please.
Please do.
Did somebody say hi this week, and it made my life.
It's so great. We love it. We love the comments. We love everything. Thank you so much.
Okay, till next time.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into HDxLiberation podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights into human design and its role in building a life of peace, success, satisfaction, and wonder. If you've enjoyed this episode, please show your support by liking, following, and sharing our podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Your engagement helps us reach more people who can benefit from this wisdom. For exclusive content and to join our thriving community, consider becoming a Patreon member. Your support allows us to continue exploring the depths of human design and its potential for life and community transformation. Stay tuned for more fun, thoughtful, and impacting discussions. Together, we're unlocking the path to a more liberated and authentic life. Thank you for being part of HDxLiberation podcast.